Some of the worst decisions ever made. Stand behind me. Bus, if you will. Just awful green light movies that should never have ever graced the screen. And look, you could argue Rocky V is one of a couple of Rockies that should never have made it. I mean, what they did to Caddyshack and The Babe, these are just awful decisions. Bus. Stories, mind you, that were propped up. Major stories. Stuff that was built off prior years or seasons, dare I say. I got to be honest with you. If Nikola Jokic doesn't win the NBA championship this year, but wins a third straight MVP, we need to put him up on the wall. Put him up on the wall. This is now Rocky 7 or whatever the fuck, Creed 9, whatever they're up to now. Enough is enough is enough. Add him to the wall. At least right now, best record in the West by a little bit. Win the damn thing, will you? 3 in a row. Larry Bird at least won a championship. Goodness gracious. I know he won more. I'm just saying. You can win one. 5 bets, 5 minutes. It begins right now. We go 4-1 last night. 4-1 last night. All right, that's DraftKings. I'm going to tell you all about that in a second. But what I want to do is bring you on over to OddsShopper Premium for our first 2 plays, okay? We're going to do 2 player props, 3 sides. Worked for us last night. Let's go to OddsShopper Premium. First thing I'm going to do here is shop the NBA bets. Shop bets, NBA, and I'm right here. I'm looking at DraftKings because that's where we're going to head. Top 2 plays. The first one's Jamal Murray, under 33.5 PRA. They're on the road. They're taking on Memphis. Memphis is pretty damn good defensively. We're not focusing on the Joker. We're focusing on the other element that Memphis is going to try and shut down. It's going to be tough. Rebounds, assists, not so much if Jokic isn't scoring. It's going to be a tougher matchup just all around for Denver from a defensive standpoint going up against Memphis. So Jamal Murray under 33.5 PRA makes sense. But as we move into Miles Turner under 9.5 rebounds, these 2 plays are beating the market. So this isn't based off, like OddsShopper Premium is not based off projections. It's based off this bet on DraftKings. In this case, these 2 bets on DraftKings are beating the market. In fact, all these bets are beating the market, but we want at least a 2% XROI, to build off. Miles Turner staying under 9.5 rebounds against Orlando. Look.
This is the Walking Wounded NBA strategy show, apparently. We've got Mike with one arm. We've got Adam getting over COVID. And just generally fine, other than my computer kind of shitting the bed this morning. So a little bit of issues for everybody here in different ways. But we're here now. We're happy you guys are watching. So like the video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Adam making his return after his trip to vacation, NBA All-Star break, and also him being sick. So Adam, overall, though, how would you describe your NBA All-Star break?
Oh, it was good. It was relaxing, had a good time. Then, managed to get sick to extend my NBA All-Star break from work. So, all things considered, it was relaxing. It was nice to get away. It's been nice to be back from, at least a fantasy standpoint. Obviously, this is my first show back, but no, it was good. How was yours?
Boring. I did very little. I very rarely got out of bed. And that pretty much categorized my few days. It was like a couple days in, it was nice. It was kind of relaxing, but I was like, I enjoy doing shows. I was ready to get back to them and do this again. And I wanted NBA to start again so I could be frustrated like last night because I had really good lineups yesterday. I was at one point in second place in the $15. I was up in total. So I was in second place, but I didn't really think it was realistic it was going to hold. But still, I was up 15 grand at the end of regulation of the Kings Clippers game. I was like, I'm about to get fucked. And then even at the end of overtime, I was still up 12 grand. And then by the end of overtime, I was like I was just above break even by the end of double overtime. So
I didn't realize that game went to double overtime. I had looked.
Yeah.
I saw you in fifth in the $15, and I thought the slate was over.
No, I was in. So yeah, I was as high as second at one point, and then as the games went to more and more overtime, I was like, I'm gonna get fucked by this eventually, especially because the payout structure was so shitty yesterday.
Right.
Because even fifth, I'm like, really, I'm gonna figure like fifth is like $2,500, and then second is 65 grand. So it was like the payout structures were terrible yesterday. It was just inevitable that something was gonna screw me, which ended up happening. So it wasn't as good as it could have been, but overall, I was fairly happy with my lineup. So
I apparently got $600 back. I thought I was getting back zero, so that's cool.
there you go. There you go. Yeah, I think where did my best lineup end up finishing? Somewhere around 10th or something like that. But yeah, also just super annoying with the highest scoring game ever, like in NBA history, goes to double overtime.
It was like 150 in regulation, right?
153.
Okay, yeah, because I looked like I'd gone to bed, but I looked and there were like 18 seconds left or whatever, and it was like 152, 150, and I was just like, this is really in 4 quarters.
It was like the end of and also at least one positive, because I really thought I was going to get screwed multiple ways. I'd also bet the Kings plus 7.5 points yesterday. I was like, they're going to somehow lose by 8 points in double overtime too, because it just felt inevitable to me that I was going to get screwed by every angle possible. But at least they did end up winning the game outright. But yeah, so it was, I think 153 at the end of regulation, highest scoring game ever to go into overtime at the end of an NBA regulation game. And yeah, it was Malik Monk hit a 3 at one point. Then Malik Monk also had like an and one to send. It was absolutely ridiculous.
176 to 175. Wow.
Yeah. And by the way, I think this is something, as it's not going to matter for today's slate, but something to consider in general. Russell Westbrook totally changed the outlook of that Clippers team. The pace they were playing at was ridiculous, and Westbrook guards nobody. He was letting De'Aaron Fox run around him for layups, and then they're pushing the pace on offense. So I think he is going to dramatically change the kind of pace that he's playing with that team, or at least that the entire team is playing. Not going to matter today because they aren't on the slate, but it was a takeaway.
No, I could see that. I was advocating for Westbrook to come back to the Wizards, and people were like, "Why do you want Westbrook?" Blah blah. And I was like, "He'd be such a good fit on the Wizards. He would basically turn them into the Kings, where they're great offensively and they are really bad defensively." I could see that same thing with the Clippers, where like obviously you have good individual defenders on the Clippers, but they have the shooting to space the floor around him, and now he's just going to get out there and run. I think you definitely could. I agree. Like just start seeing some really high scoring Clippers games.
Yeah, and especially because he had no interest in trying to defend De'Aaron Fox whatsoever, which also just speeds the game up because the Kings' possession taking like 3 seconds because Fox is just like, oh, I can just walk around Russell Westbrook and get a layup every possession. So that also just, and then the ball gets inbound to Westbrook. He is sprinting up the court. It was the most insane pace I've ever seen to a game. But we've got a slate to talk about today. Only 6 games on Saturday. There is a 7th game, but weird start time. It starts in like 2 hours. So that's not going to be included on the main slate. We're also sponsored by Prize Picks here today. And if you guys want to know the best way to get cheap access to all the tools we have over at Stokastic.com, just sign up at Prize Picks using our link because it's going to get you up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit and 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. So our player projections, our ownership projections, the Boom Bust tool, our new lineup generator, all of that is included. Just go sign up at Prize Picks using our link, 1 month for free. Let's get into the slate now, Adam. First game we have here, the Indiana Pacers against the Orlando Magic. And we're seeing the Magic in a lot of these games now, either being favored or at least even against better teams. The spreads are looking pretty competitive. Also some higher scoring games. So 232.5 total. But we're going to start by talking about the Indiana Pacers, where the production is pretty easy to generally figure out for this team. A lot of it comes from Tyrese Halliburton, Miles Turner. Buddy Hield is pretty dependent on 3-point shooting, whether he's making them or not. But you look at this team for today, is there anything that really stands out to you as being a priority type option?
Obviously a decent matchup, like you said. But I think that there's a lot of guys that look good. Maybe nobody that is a true priority, but Miles Turner at 7,300, pulling the most ownership right now on DraftKings at 25%, leads the team in optimal percentage as well at 16%. Certainly looks like a good play, but he is also a center, so that's going to typically keep his your interest level in check at least somewhat, because there are going to be a lot of other options. From a tournament standpoint, always happy to get the Halliburton, but there's going to be plenty of good options around him as well. Andrew Nembhard's down to $3,300. He absolutely sucks from a fantasy standpoint whenever he's playing with basically anybody else that's going to handle the ball. Obviously, in this case, that's primarily Tyrese Halliburton, but he's really cheap. So depending on how much value opens up, that is a spot that I think you could get to. Hield gives you a nice ceiling at 6,100. So I think it's a very, very good tournament team in terms of guys that I would be expecting to just really jam into lineups. If anything, it would probably be Miles Turner.
Yeah, and if we look at the ownership we have projected right now, actually the most popular projected player is Andrew Nembhard at 12.8% projected ownership. And it goes to what you said before, just he's really cheap on DraftKings. And it's not like we have an abundance of cheap value today, right? We're going to talk about some guys who are, Kevin Love would fit the bill. But beyond that, we got a lot of guys in the mid-range that are good plays, but not as many punt options, with kind of is driving the field towards Nembhard, it looks like, at least as far as DraftKings is going. Over on FanDuel, where Tyrese Halliburton is $8,800, too cheap for him. I think he's one of the better pay-up options on FanDuel, where he is priced at $8,800 over there, Adam, with point guard and shooting guard eligibility. How does he look different at $8,800 compared to the $9,400 price tag on DK?
For Halliburton?
Yes.
Certainly a better price tag, easier to get him into lineups as well, more positional flexibility. So certainly looks more like a priority there. On the FanDuel side, I would say he is the biggest priority, whereas on DraftKings, it's probably Turner.
And shout out to Jamal Parker in YouTube chat, who said he went to bed early because he had work today, but he ended up coming in seventh place in the $150 last night. So love to see that, Jamal. And yeah, nothing better than going to bed not knowing that you have any kind of sweat and waking up and realizing you made some money. So yeah. And also that last night's game, depending what you could have gone to bed last night thinking your lineups were totally dead, and then woke up and be like, oh look, my player scored an additional 60 fantasy points in overtime. So, last night was one of those games where a lot can end up changing, a double overtime scenario. Indiana Pacers, anything else that we should be looking at? Any kind of deep tournament plays here?
I don't really think so. I think it's just kind of like the plays, the guys you would normally get to all look fine. Like I didn't specifically mention it, but, even a $5,200 Benedict Mathurin looks fine, shooting guard, small forward. Nothing you're building around, but certainly can give you 28, 30 minutes in a good matchup. So any of the guys you would normally play, I think, look fine. There's nothing, Neesmith as well, 4,100. Like you're not going to be excited about it, but he's pulling 9% ownership. But there's nothing like off the board that I think is interesting.
So let's talk about the Orlando Magic side of the game. And I was dreading this all year when the Magic were finally going to get healthy. And it's kind of been easier to figure out than I thought it was going to, because they've been somewhat consistent with their rotations when everybody's healthy. And it's, you get Banchero, Wendell Carter Jr., Franz Wagner, Markelle Fultz all playing a little bit over 30 minutes. And then just the minutes are spread so thin elsewhere that nobody really has significant DFS upside. So we'll talk about the core guys from Orlando in a second, but am I missing anything with some of these peripheral players like a Cole Anthony or a Jalen Suggs that maybe I should be considering them more?
So I'm assuming Jonathan Isaac's not going to play today, which, if that's the case, opens up potentially more minutes for bench guys like Suggs or Cole Anthony, but probably not enough to really matter on this slate. I think it's, primarily sticking with Carter, Banchero, Wagner, Fultz. Suggs is 4K, so some interest there, I guess. But Wendell Carter at 6,500 certainly looks good. Banchero at 7,500 in tournaments looks fine. Not a huge priority, but just another team that I think looks pretty good in tournaments, but no one guy stands out as a great option. It is a very appealing matchup against the Pacers, though.
Why do you think Isaac is not playing, by the way?
Didn't Orlando? Wait, never mind. Orlando didn't play yesterday. I take that back.
No.
They played 2 days ago.
Yeah, they played 2 days ago. I was just making sure I didn't miss something.
No, I was just thinking they were on a back-to-back.
Yeah, all good. So that's also something, too. When you got like Jonathan Isaac, and what we found is like Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs, Mo Wagner, Jonathan Isaac, just all these guys end up playing like 16 to 22 minutes, and it just makes a lot of them not all that appealing. But what's kind of been nice is that the minutes for Banchero, Wendell Carter Jr., Franz Wagner, and Markelle Fultz all of them have been pretty consistent. The guy that I've been playing the most as of late has been Fultz. Not that he's been a priority or anything, but I found that he's the guy who's most consistently underutilized by the field. Now, with that said, he is up to $6,900 on FanDuel now. And on DraftKings, we have Fultz priced up to $6,600. So a little bit less appealing than when he was a few $100s less expensive. But of the Fultz, Wagner, Wendell Carter Jr., Boncaro, those four who are really the core guys for Orlando, do you see any of them as being stronger options than the other tonight?
So Carter would probably be my favorite option, but he is a center, so you kind of have to weigh that in. I think it's between Carter and Fultz as the guys that I would get to first. They are typically the ones I get to the most. I'm with you on that. From a value standpoint, Jalen Suggs at 4K, he's another one where if other value doesn't open up, I could see taking some shots on him, but as value opens up, he's certainly going to look less and less appealing. Boncaro and Franz Wagner, I think, are a step behind Carter and Fultz for me.
Anything else you want to talk about here from Orlando?
If value doesn't open up, do you have any interest in Jonathan Isaac? He played 16 and a half minutes last game.
Let's see. Where do we have Isaac priced at? He is $3,400 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, where the scoring is a little bit more favorable towards Isaac because of the defensive stats, he's 4,200. So that would be a little bit more difficult. If there's absolutely no value and he's sub 1% owned, let's see, what is his points per minute? He's been really good on a points per minute basis this year. It's only 11 games, but still 11 minutes, 14 fantasy points. It's hard to look at his previous years, which I normally do for these kind of scenarios because he hasn't played in so long. Last time he was playing was 2019. And then he played 28 minutes per game, over 30 fantasy points. I think it's reasonable to assume that Isaac at this point in his career is still over a fantasy point per minute guy. So if we could be generous and say he gets 17 minutes today, 18 minutes maybe, and no other value opens up and he's still 1% owned, I can make a case for it in large field tournaments.
Yeah, I was kind of just thinking along the lines of like, if we're going to get a slate where Andrew Nembhard is going to be, 10 to 12% owned, and it's just that kind of slate where you are that starved for value, I could see taking shots on him, because the other thing is they had said last game, I think, that he was still going to be limited to like 14 to 16 minutes. He played 16 and a half. So they are getting a little bit more aggressive with him coming out of the break. I hate playing guys that are on hard minutes caps, but I was just thinking, like, if it does turn into that slate where people are playing Andrew Nembhard at like a high frequency and guys like that, I could see taking some shots with just an unknown Isaac.
Yeah, the upside is definitely a little bit capped, but if you give him 18 minutes, I mean, you end up with a projection of him of nearly 20 fantasy points. So if there's no other value that opens up, then I think that would make sense. Now, with that said, I expect some value to open up at some other point over the course of the day, but I do think it's an interesting talking point. Let's move on to the next one here, the Miami Heat against the Orlando Magic. For the Heat, Kyle Lowry remains out. He has generally been dog shit this year, and it is a very good matchup against the Charlotte Hornets, but absence of Kyle Lowry is not going to matter all that much. The thing that was most interesting about last night's slate that a lot of us could agree upon, Kevin Love started for the Heat. I ended up with 100% exposure to him. I did not expect going into the day that Kevin Love was going to start. But if we look at the price point on Love, assuming he remains in the starting lineup, he is $4,000 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he is $3,800. Kevin Love is washed at this point in his career relative to who he was before, but he's still over a point per minute fantasy producer. And if he starts in a good matchup against the Hornets, it is hard to not consider him the top value option right now.
Yeah, agreed. Looks very good if he starts. And like, he was disappointing last night in part because that game blew out. And also he just didn't do anything from a scoring standpoint. But that kind of reiterates how good of a value he is if he's starting, because he scored 20 fantasy points without scoring a single point. He was 0 for 4 from the field, 0 for 4 from 3. So like, that part is not encouraging, because clearly, like, if that's going to be his role in the offense, is just, take threes here and there, but not actually do anything offensively, he's not going to be the same point per minute guy. But he still just gives you so much in terms of being a good rebounder and, just being on the floor in general, that at 3,800, he's still going to look like a really good value. And if this game is competitive and he starts, he's likely giving you more than the 22 minutes that he played last night.
Yeah, and then once again, everything possible that could have gone wrong for him went wrong. And we got, 20 fantasy points on him on DraftKings at the flat min price. Like, he was still perfectly serviceable and fine in tournaments. And that really felt like as much of oh, by the way, we just got some news that's going to impact the other side of the game. PJ Washington foot injury yesterday. He is uncertain for today. So we'll be touching on that in a second. Good timing because that team we're about to talk about here. But yeah, I'm not too deterred by what we saw out of Kevin Love yesterday because once again, he had a 7% usage rate. It was his first game with the new team. It felt like this was as bad as everything could possibly gone, and he scored 20 fantasy points. If that's the floor for him, which I think it probably is somewhere around there if he's starting, play him in cash games, in tournaments still, I'm going to get a whole bunch of exposure to him. Does he have any kind of significant impact to the other players in the starting lineup? Because one thing I was concerned about yesterday is that Kevin Love still is a guy who typically we think of as a higher usage guy relative to who the Heat have been playing in some of those spots where, we've seen, like Kyle Lowry starting as a really low usage guy for the Heat. Is there any concern that this could ultimately end up taking shots away from Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, or was the usage so low yesterday that you don't think that's a concern?
I mean, I think it's a concern in the sense that you said where the guy that he's replacing in the lineup basically is Caleb Martin, who is non-existent. So you could see a sizable drop-off in Kevin Love's usage from where he was in Cleveland and previously in his career, and him still settle in as a higher usage guy than Caleb Martin. And that would have, a negative impact. I think that it's most likely a case where on a game-by-game basis, you still have that very high ceiling for Adebayo, for Hero, for Butler. But on average, they probably will just end up projecting a little bit lower because Love will probably average a higher usage rate than Caleb Martin. But I also do think that you're going to see a lower usage rate for Love than you have at previous times in his career as long as he's starting here. I think it's more likely. I'm not saying you're going to see, 4 shots per 22 minutes for Kevin Love, but I think it's very likely that his role offensively is more of a space the floor, shoot the ball when I pass it to you, as opposed to run the offense through Kevin Love at all.
Yeah, and 19% usage rate for Kevin Love this year, on the whole 14.9% for Martin. So definitely slightly higher usage for Kevin Love for the season. But now talking about those other guys, Adebayo, Butler here, it's a great matchup against the Charlotte Hornets. Who is your preference of the Miami pay-up options?
Hero's only 7,100 on DraftKings, so I think that's pretty clearly my answer there. Not as much opportunity cost for him either, since he is guard eligible. Same thing on FanDuel. He's 7,600, so he's more expensive than on DraftKings. But you have Bam 9,100 center only, Butler at 9,600. It's just going to be easier for me to get to Hero on FanDuel, and certainly easier to get there on DraftKings where he's 7,100.
Yeah, so I agree with that as well. Tyler Hero, just because of the cost on him, I think he makes the most sense. And Jimmy Butler's gotten to be a little bit more expensive than he was. He's now $8,200 on DraftKings, $9,600 on FanDuel. If I'm not mistaken, he was $8,400 with Kevin Love last night in the first game. So yeah, pretty big price increase there. Part of that is due to this matchup against the Charlotte Hornets. And do you have anything else you want to bring up for Miami?
Somebody in chat said they watched the game and that Love basically was just camping at the 3-point line and his teammates weren't paying attention to him. That's fully what I expect his offensive role in this team to be. Miami needs shooting. They need floor spacing. I have no idea why there were rumors about Russell Westbrook coming to Miami. That would have probably been a worse fit than he was on the Lakers, which is saying a lot. But that's what this team needs badly, and Kevin Love can give them that. So, I don't expect, like I was saying, I don't expect this to be, we're going to throw the ball to Love in the post and we're going to run the offense through Love. I think it's going to be Kevin Love stands in the corner and Kevin Love shoots threes when they give him the ball. So I don't expect him to be a high usage guy, but he is still a good rebounder. He is still somebody that's just going to accumulate peripherals. And then, when he does happen to knock down some threes, you're going to get massive games.
Yeah. And the other thing too, is with Kevin Love to keep in mind about yesterday, they basically signed him. He showed up and they just threw him in the starting lineup. Like, I think it does make sense that his role could grow as it goes on. Like, I was so surprised they started him yesterday because I didn't know how to project his minutes before we found out he was starting. So like, this guy could be not in the rotation. He could play a minimal role, or he could be the first man off the bench for them. But the fact that he was just starting in the first game, I think it's going to take him a little bit of time just to familiarize himself with the players and the offense. It would just make sense to be like, hey, your first game here, you're just going to be a catch and shoot guy. Right. And I think we could see more plays dedicated towards Kevin Love moving forward.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. But overall, I think his role is just going to be to catch and shoot and space the floor for Butler. But certainly, as he grows into the offense, you can certainly see more.
So let's talk about the Charlotte side of the game. We just got some unexpected news that we haven't really had any time to think about because we didn't know about it, but we will be talking it through right now. I do not think PJ Washington is going to play based on the report we just saw. Apparently suffered a foot sprain yesterday. His status is uncertain for today. Considering where the Hornets are in the standings, why the hell play PJ Washington? Like, what's the point?
Right.
Although with that said, what was the point of not trading Gordon Hayward or Terry Rozier or anybody at the trade deadline? But I do not think that PJ Washington is going to play today. We'll need to check this out back later in the day when we have more information. But if PJ Washington was to not play tonight, Adam, what are we looking at in terms of value from Hornets?
Not entirely sure because this team looks different than it did before the deadline. Like the immediate answer was going to be McDaniels, but obviously that's not it. So I think you would certainly get more solidified playing time for like Gordon Hayward, which you've been getting recently anyway. Kelly Oubre was on a minutes limit yesterday. No idea if he even plays today. Minutes for JT Thor, Svi Mikhailuk, like
is it just me, or do they only have like 9 players on the roster as is?
Yeah,
they don't have guys.
They seem very shorthanded.
I mean, they've got players in the G League, right? They've got like Bruce McGowan's down there. They've got James Bouknight. But in terms of players that have been active, they've got Ball, Rozier, Williams, Hayward, Washington, Oubre, Richards, Dennis Smith Jr., Svi, Thor. Like, that's only 10 guys right now.
Right, yeah, and Caleb Martin's out, or Cody Martin's out. So, yeah, I mean, we'll have to see who they recall from the G League. But because, like, they had 10 bodies yesterday. If Washington doesn't play, that would be 9. If Oubre sits on the back-to-back, that would be 8. I think there's probably a good chance that you get Bryce McGowan's back, soaking up some minutes. Maybe Bouknight comes back and gets some rotation minutes. But if Washington's out, it certainly makes this team very shorthanded. It's more so a matter of none of the guys filling those minutes are any good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even like Kai Jones, Bouknight. Right. We've seen him up in the Charlotte roster, and he's generally been terrible when he's got an NBA run. But what's going to matter if these guys get called up or not is if PJ Washington sits. Look, we're just going to have to see cheap guys play extended minutes because it's the tail end of a back-to-back. I doubt they're going to just be like, "Hey, Gordon Hayward, go play 40 minutes today." I don't think that's what would happen. So maybe we see like Nick Richards and Mark Williams play minutes together. Maybe they try that out. So
one thing, looking at the minutes yesterday, Mark Williams and Nick Richards only played 37 minutes. JT Thor played 8. So I don't know exactly if it was Thor at the 5 or Washington at the 5 or whatever, but I would expect 48 minutes from Williams plus Richards, and then JT Thor playing alongside them for 16 to 18 minutes, something like that, if Washington is out. So that's one spot where I think you see minutes picked up, is just you get back to that 48-minute split from Williams and Richards.
And then I think a lot of people will probably want to gravitate towards LaMelo as well as a pay-up option. This is a tough matchup, and he's so expensive now. 10-5 on FanDuel is a little more reasonable, but 10-4 on DK, 10-5 on FanDuel. That's still a really expensive price tag for LaMelo against Miami. I'm not going to say that he's unplayable, but I think he might end up going a little bit. He might end up being more popular with the ownership projections just because of the game he had yesterday. And I don't really love this spot for him. LaMelo is a pay up option. Is he somebody that you are going to be prioritizing at all?
Not prioritizing. I'm never upset if I get to LaMelo, especially because he's playing huge minutes when he avoids foul trouble. And if PJ Washington's out, not that they play the same positions, but it just makes it even more difficult for LaMelo not to play a ton of minutes. So the playing time's great. The matchup's not. The price tag is less than, desirable, but it's just one of those spots where whatever LaMelo I get to, I'm happy with, but I think he's going to be difficult to prioritize in the sense of I'm going into the slate playing, 40% LaMelo or something.
Yeah, and somebody brought up, should we expect Gordon Hayward to play in a back-to-back? He's played the last couple. February 2nd against Boston and February 11th against the Nuggets. We saw Gordon Hayward play in both of those games. February 2nd against Charlotte and February 3rd against Detroit. He played in both of those games. He did sit on January 24th after they played on January 23rd, but I wouldn't say I could say with 100% confidence Gordon Hayward plays as of now, but he's played the last couple of back-to-backs, and with them being shorthanded, I do assume that he plays again. I think they will be somewhat restricted with his minutes, just in terms of, I think that I don't think we see like a 40-minute game out of Gordon Hayward or anything like that, no matter how shorthanded they are, just because they played yesterday. But anything else you want to talk about from Charlotte?
Nick Richards at 3,600. So I mentioned, that I think if Washington's out, you're pretty much locked in the 48 minutes combined from Mark Williams and Nick Richards. Williams is 5,600, which that by itself is fine. But Nick Richards 3,600. If he's just on average playing 20 minutes, but has the potential to play more if Williams gets in foul trouble. Again, if value doesn't open up elsewhere, that's another just interesting spot that isn't really getting any ownership.
So let's move on to the next game, the New Orleans Pelicans against the New York Knicks. And the Pelicans slightly healthier than they were a few weeks ago, but still no Zion Williamson for this team, and no immediate return in sight for Zion either. So he's out. Brandon Ingram has seen more usage lately. CJ McCollum as well has seen more usage. Game against the Knicks, one of the lower totals, actually I think the lowest total of the night, 223.5 points. So from the Pelicans, to me, what stands out the most, Josh Richardson started for them last game. And it looks to me like this is a role that he is probably going to be playing for the foreseeable future. He's played really well so far with the Pelicans, but starting last game, played 29 minutes, did pick up 4 personal fouls in that game. Richardson today is $4,200 on DraftKings, making him probably my second favorite value option as of now behind Kevin Love. And then over on FanDuel, he's much more expensive, $5,900 for Richardson. I think FanDuel's got him priced appropriately, and I just think DraftKings is way too short on Richardson. So how do you view him as a value option?
Yeah, on DraftKings in particular, certainly looks like a good value. 0.94 DraftKings points per minute so far in his 81 minutes with the Pelicans. That's a little bit inflated by him setting, I think, a career high in his first game with the Pels in steals. But the minutes should be there. He started last game, played 28.9 minutes. If you're just going to get call it 26 to 30 minutes from him at 4,200, shooting guard, small forward, so you can roster him at 5 different positions on DraftKings. He's just going to be a good value. Probably going a little bit over-owned. Right now we have him at 27% ownership, 14% chance of being optimal. But we've kind of already alluded to, at least right now, it seems like we're going to be a little bit shorthand or a little bit starved for value. Now, granted, it is a Saturday. Typically on Saturdays, you just start getting entire teams ruling themselves out as the day goes on. But with it being right out of the All-Star break, maybe that doesn't happen quite as much yet. So if things remain the way they are right now, I could certainly see it being a situation where it's Richardson is over-owned relative to optimal percentage, but there's still better ways to be contrarian elsewhere as opposed to going to really shitty value when Richardson's one of the few value pieces that actually looks good.
Yeah, and also I think he probably has the upside to play north of 30 minutes in this game against the Knicks as well. And it does seem like we're getting a little bit tighter of a rotation from the Pelicans as they're pushing for a playoff spot. The one thing that hasn't changed, though, is we're not getting the big minutes out of Valanciunas. That's made him a little bit more difficult to play. Between Ingram and McCollum, either of them stand out to you?
So, I mean, they both look better whenever Zion's out, but the price tags have also come up, and it's a pretty unappealing matchup. So 8,500 for Ingram, 76 for McCollum. They're both fine in tournaments just because they are very high usage guys. They certainly have high ceilings. Same can be said for Jovel at 6,100. He's capable of just going out there and putting up 2 fantasy points per minute. He did play 29 minutes last game in a game where Larry Nance was healthy. That's good to see because we had seen or not been seeing that recently. So there is a ceiling for him, but on average, you're only expecting 24, 25 minutes. So all 3 of those main guys are tough to get to, but they do offer very high ceilings here if things break your way. So at low ownership, I have some interest, but it's more so just this is a contrarian way to round out a lineup instead of I'm building around Jovel or Ingram or McCollum.
And then any of these other role players worth talking about, Herb Jones, Larry Nance, Trey Murphy, it seems like these guys, well, Herb Jones is still playing minutes. He's just not a great fantasy producer. But these other guys, it just seems to me at this point, especially with Richardson starting and playing more of a role, there just isn't enough minutes for them.
Yeah, they don't look very good. I would say I think that they are going under-owned relative to Josh Richardson right now. We have Josh Richardson projected for 22 DraftKings points. We have Jones at 22. We have Murphy at 20. Richardson's pulling 6 times the ownership of Jones and 26 times the ownership of Murphy. So it's a situation where Richardson is clearly the guy that I'm going to prefer out of that group, but the field's there as well. If you needed to get off of Richardson in a lineup but you still needed something in that price range, I think either of Jones or Murphy do make some sense.
So let's talk about the Knicks side of the game where we've got Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson really doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the Knicks. And oftentimes if you watch the games, it seems like nobody else is shooting other than them two. And as a result, they are projected for more points than anybody else on the Knicks by a really wide margin. So Randle, Brunson, as far as them as pay up options, do you like getting to either of them today?
Yeah, I like both of them. Randall's price tags come down a bit. He's 9,500 on DraftKings. You have Brunson at 8,200. You know, both of these guys are going to play huge minutes. So you obviously like to see that. And like you said, the offense is just entirely running through these guys. There's not much else going on offensively with this team. RJ Barrett is your third option, but he's not a particularly high usage guy when Brunson and Randall are out there. Josh Hart's not someone that's really going to come in and steal a lot of shots. Mitchell Robinson returning, if he does play on the back-to-back, he's not a high usage guy anyway. So you really just have Brunson and Randall running the entire offense, and they're both very good offensively as well. So it's not like it's a situation where you would think the Knicks would be looking to change that anytime soon. So I do like getting to both of those guys.
And then outside of them, is anything else decent looking to you from the Knicks? We've got Josh Hart in the mix. He throws a wrench into it. And then also we've got Mitchell Robinson back. He takes away center minutes from the other guys like Isaiah Hartenstein and Jericho Sims that we had seen playing. So it's hard for me to really, really gravitate towards anybody outside of Randall or Brunson. Is there anybody I'm missing out on?
Not really. RJ Barrett's 5,700 if you want to try and get lucky there. Josh Hart's 5,600 if you want to try and get lucky there. Robinson at 5,200 is kind of interesting, but again, there's a bunch of good centers that we like today. Robinson's not at the top of my list of guys to try and get to. So I think it's, Brunson and Randall are the guys that you're actually like building around from the Knicks. And then if you want to take some shots on Barrett or Robinson or Hart in large field tournaments, they're not high probability plays, but there is at least a path to them having success.
Is there anything else you want to talk about from the Knicks?
Nope.
All right, so we got an announcement to make here. Going to be a quick one. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard this already, but actually Adam probably isn't even aware of this. We're going to be doing a live betting show on OddsShopper starting on Monday, every single weekday. This is going to be starting at 4 p.m. So from 4 p.m. to 5, we're going to have a bunch of different guys in there talking about betting. So it's going to be kind of like our live before lock show, but just geared towards betting and on our OddsShopper channel. So I'll be on it some days. And then it's primarily also going to be Ben will be on there. Eric is going to be on there. Aton's going to be hosting a lot of those shows. So it should be fun. We're trying to build up our betting product. We're going to be featuring all of the new tools we have. And we've got a lot of cool betting tools now. Adam's been doing his NBA Bet Pro video. We've now got OddsShopper Insider. So we've got that where we've got a market-based tool that's giving out bets for hockey, NCAA, which, by the way, that was something I did a lot over my NBA All-Star break, Adam, as I started to really use a lot of the OddsShopper stuff to bet on like NCAA basketball games and NHL, which I don't know shit about, but I actually made a good amount of money about it. So I'm excited that we're going to be having shows to feature more of this stuff on the OddsShopper channel starting Monday, February 27th, 4 p.m. Be there, or be square, as the kids like to say. So go check that out, guys. If you're not following our OddsShopper channel, go do that. Let's move on to the second half of tonight's games. We have the Denver Nuggets against the Memphis Grizzlies, and another tough matchup for Nikola Jokic. Generally, it hasn't mattered, though. He is absolutely kicking the shit out of everybody right now. He just had the most difficult matchup possible. Going up against the Cleveland Cavaliers, they're first in the league in defensive efficiency. They play the slowest pace in the league, and Jokic had a triple-double like 3 minutes into the third quarter. So, guy is playing out of his mind right now. But do you like him as a pay-up option for this particular slate?
If you can get there, sure. Like, you're never wrong for playing Nikola Jokic. He's just unbelievably good. 11,700 on DraftKings is a certainly reasonable price tag. The only kind of issue I have or concern I have is just that we have talked about there not being great value that we love on this slate, and then there also being kind of an underpriced mid-range of centers, whether that is Wendell Carter or taking shots on Joe Val or taking shots on Mitchell Robinson or taking, going to Miles Turner at 7,300. Like, there are enough good mid-range centers where you need those 65, 70, 75 DraftKings point games out of Jokic, most likely, at least with the way the slate looks right now, for you to be glad that you rostered him, because it's not like you just have an abundance of salary to spend. And, it is a tough matchup, like you said, but outside of positional concerns, of course, I like getting Jokic.
Yeah, he is the player that projects the best of anybody on the slate for me. I think that is pretty tough to argue otherwise. It just becomes a case of how much value opens up, how easy is it to get to Jokic. He's only center eligible, but if you can play him, if anybody gave me a 1v1 today and said Jokic versus anybody else, the answer would be Jokic. That's the way that I would best describe him as an option today. Does anything else stand out to you about the Denver Nuggets? Jamal Murray is back in the picture. Michael Porter Jr. has played better as of late, but still, this is a fairly difficult matchup against the Memphis Grizzlies. So anybody aside from Jokic standing out?
decent price tag on Jamal Murray at 7,800. Kind of surprised he's pulling 14% ownership because I don't think he's like wildly underpriced or anything, but you do get a very nice ceiling there. He's also somebody that, and this isn't, anything that I really prioritize. It's not like actionable, but it's just something that I like when I see it in lineups. If you don't have Jokic in a lineup, like having Jamal Murray kind of makes me feel better because at least I can look at it and say like, all right, we can just get the random, Jamal Murray going nuts game that takes away from Jokic, as opposed to when you look at a lineup and it's just like, well, I don't have Jokic and I don't have Murray, and I know somebody from this team probably gonna have a big game. But so again, it's not like I'm building lineup saying like you must have one of Murray or Jokic, but it is a kind of way. It is a way to leverage away from Jokic a little bit if you can't get to him in a lineup. If you're hand building, that's something you could use as a tiebreaker. But Murray looks pretty good. The rest of the team, I'm not too excited about. Michael Porter Jr. at 6K is fine, small forward eligible. But I think Jokic and Murray are the two that you're really looking to get to.
So let's talk about the Memphis side of the game then. And deep team, the center rotation has just been a mess to try to figure out. So I was really surprised Brandon Clark got the start last game against Joel Embiid. Just the way they've generally done their starting centers, that seemed like a Xavier Tillman spot. And then Brandon Clark started, and he wasn't projected to be popular. I was like, I think this is a really good spot to just play Brandon Clark in tournaments at low ownership. Picked up 2,000 in 3 minutes against Joel Embiid, and then just ended up having a totally shit game because of that. But what are you expecting from the starting center today? Because Tillman should be the starter, at least how they've generally done matchups that would play against Jokic. But since Clark started against Embiid, I'm not exactly sure who would be the starting center. If it is Clark, I do think that you can make a case for him to be a really strong value option. The field agrees. He's 40% projected owned at 4,600 on DK, but do you expect him to start tonight?
I expect Tillman to start. I'm with you that I was surprised Clark started last game, but then Clark immediately got in foul trouble. They went to Tillman to start the second half. Tillman ended up playing 32 minutes. I'm assuming they just go back to Tillman today. But I'm with you. If they do go to Clark, I'm not going to just look at last game and be like, we're just going to get the same thing. Like if they're starting Clark, it's not like the blueprint is play Clark 16 minutes. If they're starting Clark, he's going to have every opportunity to play normal, 28, 30 minutes if he can avoid foul trouble and play well. And at 4,600 with power forward eligibility, that gives him a massive ceiling. But I assume they start Tillman. And in that case, I'm not really interested in either guy because you're probably not getting enough minutes for me to want to pay 4,600 for Clark. Tillman is center only, so the opportunity cost is higher. So it does really matter to me who's starting.
Yeah, and the other thing too is if Clark starts and he's going to be, if he's like 45% owned, we've got him projected for, like I said, north of 40% on DraftKings, nearly 50% on FanDuel. I think Clark would be very, very live to get into foul trouble guarding Jokic. I would love Tillman as a pivot play off of Clark if Clark ends up starting and actually ends up being like 50% owned.
I probably would just, the only reason I wouldn't is you're paying 4,700 for a center only backup. Like, even if Clark gets in foul trouble, let's say Clark plays, 18 minutes or something. If you get 30 minutes from Tillman at 4,700, that, like, if you projected Tillman for 30 minutes, he would be like a completely marginal play. And so you're kind of taking on a really big risk, I think, for a relatively low reward. Like it's a little bit different to me than the situation. Like if Mark Williams is really popular, you play Nick Richards, who's, minimum salary, because if he gets those minutes, he's basically an automatic, like, good value. For me, Tillman is priced to play the minutes that he would play if Clark gets in foul trouble.
Yeah, fair enough. Last game, we did get 32 minutes and 32 fantasy points out of Tillman. For me, I'd be a little more apt. And once again, it would only be large field tournaments if we actually had, because here's the split we have right now. And I agree with you. It's very risky, but at least as of right now, Clark is projected for 40.2% ownership on DraftKings, and Tillman is projected for 0.1%.
Yeah, and to be clear, like, I agree with you. It's like a viable way to go. It's certainly the correct thought process. It's just like, for me, I don't think I'd be able to get to him at 4,700 if he's not starting. Even if I gave him some sort of a bump just because I wanted to. I think it certainly can pay off. I think it makes sense. It's just still, I think, a little bit lower probability than I'd want to go to.
And then let's talk about the guys who matter the most for it. Well, I guess the player does matter the most right now is Brandon Clark, just because of his ownership. But Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant, these are the pay up options for Memphis. All of them are having really strong seasons. At least as of right now, I don't think any of them are picking up that much ownership. We have the most popular player from Memphis outside of Brandon Clark, Morant, is 19% owned on DraftKings. So some ownership going to him, not a crazy amount. FanDuel's actually priced him now sub 10K. And a little weird to me that Morant's sub 10K is 23% owned on FanDuel. I actually think he should be more popular than that, and somebody I would strongly consider in cash games as well. How does Morant look as a pay up option for you?
I think he looks really good. That's just a cheap price tag. I think the thing that you do kind of have to touch on, because if you just look, the immediate thought, at least for me, it's like LaMelo Ball is 10-4 and John Morant is 10K. Like, how do you not just play John Morant when you, because like I just kind of consider them like very similar fantasy plays. But the thing you do have to keep in mind is that on average, Ja is playing like 33, 34 minutes. LaMelo is probably going to approach 40 minutes. So you do have a very big minutes gap between those two. And I think that's where you could argue that pivoting some of this John Morant to LaMelo Ball makes sense. But 10K for Morant is a pretty cheap price tag. Obviously, the offense is going to run through him. He's a great point per minute guy. The only concern for him is, is he going to play 32, 33 minutes, or is he going to play 35, 36? Memphis just runs a flat enough rotation that it's tough to expect more than like 33 or so for him on average, but still looks very, very good at 10K.
Yeah, Morant right now is my preferred point guard pay up option if I could only choose one to roster. So I think Morant does look pretty solid. As for Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, do you have any strong takes on either of them?
Price tags have gotten up there on those guys. They still make some sense in tournaments just from an upside standpoint. You got 33 minutes again last game from Jaren Jackson Jr., so you've seen more playing time from him. It's really just a foul trouble issue. If he avoids foul trouble at this point, you can expect 30-plus minutes. They are at home, so he is going to block 8 more shots than normal. But he's a very, very high upside guy that defensive stat volatility gives you a very high ceiling. Desmond Bane's a very good offensive player. There's only so many shots to go around playing with Morant, but certainly capable of big games. But I think of the guys not getting a ton of ownership, Jackson is my favorite guy to get to. Dylan Brooks is pulling 13% ownership. He is only 4,100 small forward eligible, playing 30-plus minutes. The thing to keep in mind with him, and I've mentioned this before, is that, as much as we kind of turn Dylan Brooks into a meme where he's just taking all of these shots away from John Morant and guys that should be shooting, he's really not that guy when Bane, Jackson, and Morant are all active. Brooks has like a mid to upper teens usage rate. He's averaged like 0.65 DraftKings points per minute when those guys are all active. So he is cheap. He is playing minutes. I understand why he's getting some ownership, but it's not the same situation where you're saying, oh, Dylan Brooks is cheap. If his shots go in, like he's going to take a bunch of shots. If they fall, we're good. He's probably not going to take a bunch of shots.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. And 2 games left to talk about, so we'll move on. And probably the least interesting team on the entire slate to me is the Boston Celtics. The most popular player on the entire team tonight is Time Lord. Robert Williams projected for 5% ownership on DraftKings. We have not seen very many games this year where the Boston Celtics have been entirely healthy. We definitely haven't seen it lately either. It's either Tatum is banged up, Brown is banged up, Tatum less so than the other guys. Marcus Smart has missed time. Williams is rested. Horford is rested. So there have not been very many times we've seen these guys all totally healthy together. As a result, kind of everybody's price tag is at a ceiling. They have a tough matchup on the road against the Philadelphia 76ers. And I just think the entire team pretty much is overpriced now.
Yeah, I don't think they look all that appealing. I think the 3 main guys for me would be Robert Williams and then Tatum and Brown. 10-5 for Tatum is a little bit cheaper than we've seen recently. 8,900 for Jaylen Brown, a little bit cheaper than we've seen recently. Neither one is cheap enough to really stand out as a top option. But in tournaments where you're only getting 3% ownership to Brown or 4% to Tatum, I do think that they're, at least somewhat interesting. And then Robert Williams just becomes another one of these relatively inexpensive centers where there's a very nice ceiling. How many minutes he plays is up in the air, but if you're expecting around 26 minutes on average with the potential to get to 28 to 30, there is a ceiling for him, kind of similar to what we talked about with Mitchell Robinson.
So let's move on to the Sixers then, because I just don't think there's a whole lot to like from the Celtics, unless there's anything else you want to add.
There's not.
So let's talk about the 76ers. Looking at our initial ownership, one of the players I'm most confused by is that DeAnthony Melton's expected to be somewhat chalky today. The Sixers are another team that's healthy right now. Melton played 13 minutes last game. I know that there was some foul trouble, But even with that aside, like what is the realistic minute ceiling for Melton, who's played less than 20 minutes in what, 3 of the last 5 games, to the point where he is 14% owned on FanDuel at a $4,600 price tag. And I get that he's cheaper on DraftKings at $3,500, but 17% ownership. I don't think it's warranted. Like, what am I missing with Melton?
Nothing. I mean, so the minute ceiling is probably like 30 because you like if he's playing well and you take minutes away from Maxey and, you know, maybe Shake Milton doesn't play or something, like we get those games just often enough where Melton plays like 26 to 30 that it keeps him somewhat interesting. But this is the kind of play where if you were getting like 2% ownership, it would be like, okay, what if I get lucky and things break my way? If he's actually going to pull 15% ownership, I am fine just not playing the guy that on average is going to play like 16 minutes. Because it's not like, you know, yeah, he's starting, but it's not like him, you know, not playing minutes is super fluky. Like he lost 3.5 minutes to foul trouble in the first half last game. He played 7 minutes to open the game. He was going to play about 6 to close the half. So you were going to get about 13 minutes there. And then he got in foul trouble again in the third quarter, never came back in the fourth. So like, yeah, he played fewer minutes last game than you would expect him to play, but unless he's in the closing lineup, you can't really get to those 26 minutes. You're probably getting like 18 to 20. And the problem with him being in the closing lineup is he has to jump ahead of one of Tyrese Maxey or PJ Tucker. Tyrese Maxey is mostly going to be in the closing lineup. Like Tyrese Maxey is very good. PJ Tucker doesn't have to be, but you know, obviously they do like him out there for defensive reasons, which is the same reason that you would want Melton out there. So, like, yeah, there's a path to 26 minutes, which is appealing at 3,500. It's the ownership that scares me off though, because right now he's just projected to be rostered as if it's a lock. He's playing 26 minutes when really he's playing anywhere from like, you know, 16 to 26.
And you look at his recent games, and by the way, these are all games that he starts. I get he's starting now, but he's been starting. So last game he plays 13 minutes, he scores 3.5 fantasy points. The game before that, he gets up to 34, but still 26 fantasy points. Not like he broke the slate. And then the games before that, 21 minutes, 16 fantasy points, 14 minutes, 1 fantasy point, 18 minutes, 8 fantasy points. Even though he's starting, by and large, the minutes have not been there. Maxey's still the guy that they close with, even if they start with him coming off the bench. So tough for me to really get behind Melton at that kind of ownership. Joel Embiid and James Harden, I like both of them as pay-up options.
Yeah, same here. So I just went back and looked. 18 total games this year where DeAnthony Melton has started with all of James Harden, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey active. He's averaged 25.3 minutes per game, 0.75 DraftKings points per minute. So kind of to your point, if you just, let's say he plays to that average, which I think is probably a little bit high. It includes those games when Maxey first came back from injury. But let's just say he does play 25 minutes and he scores, you know, 0.75 DraftKings points per minute. You get a good point per dollar value, but it's nothing that you're upset isn't in your lineup. And so that's where it comes back to the ownership as well. And that's kind of what I was saying was if he just plays to that average, I don't care that I don't have him in my lineups. When he gets under that, I love that I don't have him, and 15% of the field does. So if you were, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5% owned, it would be like, oh, well, sometimes he's going to exceed that, and I'm going to be in really good shape at low ownership. But if the ownership remains there, I would rather just, you know, hope he plays to his average or worse. As far as the other guys, Embiid, Harden both look good if you can get there. I do prefer getting to Morant over Harden if you can. I prefer LaMelo if you can find the $500 extra as well, but certainly not going to be upset about getting to a $9,900 Harden or an 11-3 Embiid. You know, I'd rather find $400 for Jokic if I can, but Jokic is also getting like twice the ownership. And realistically, you have a similar range of outcomes, even though Jokic is going to project a little bit better. Maxey at 5,300 is interesting. You know, obviously he's not as good a point per minute guy when he's playing with Embiid and with Harden, but if he's going to play mid 30s off the bench at 5,300, that's going to be a, you know, decent price tag. I don't mind taking shots on Tobias Harris at 5,300, only 8% owned. He's certainly taken a step back in terms of fantasy production this year with Tyrese Maxey taking on a bigger role and playing, you know, with Embiid and Harden. But at 5,300, if he's going to play 32 to 34 minutes at modest ownership, I kind of like that play.
So let's move on to the final game of the slate, the San Antonio Spurs against the Utah Jazz. And still no designated return time for Devin Vassell, which leaves the Spurs still shorthanded and potentially even more shorthanded in the backcourt because Trey Jones is questionable. So, Adam, if Trey Jones is not able to play in addition to Romeo Langford being out and then Devin Vassell being out, who would become the primary ball handler in the backcourt for this team?
It should be. So last game Jones was out. They went Branham and Graham. I assume you would get the same starting lineup if Jones sits today. If Jones comes back, my guess is that Devontae Graham's moving back to the bench.
Could be. I mean, that's what we saw a couple of games ago. But the one thing that does give me just a little bit of pause is that when he was coming off the bench, he was also newer to the team. So maybe he's just played himself into the starting lineup now. But in general, I agree with you. Even in a start last game, he only played 28 minutes. I get it was a blowout, but it does seem like he would head back to the bench. But who would be the priority option for you as far as value goes if Tre Jones doesn't play?
If he does or does not?
Doesn't. Sorry.
Graham at 4,500 would look good. Like you said, he played 28 and a half last game, but that game did blow out. You also didn't get him closing the first half, which on the one hand is obviously not a good sign when, you know, he's not guaranteed to close a half, but also like if he's playing well, he can just pick up those extra minutes as well. So if Tre Jones is out, I would expect you're getting, 28 to 30 minutes from Graham on average, and that would make him look pretty good at 4,500. One change from last game is that Jeremy Sohan is probable today. He was out last game. I expect that kicks Keita Bates-Diop back to the bench, probably, and takes, a couple minutes away from like Doug McDermott. But if Jones is out, I think Graham's going to look like a good value. I think Malachi Branham at 5,200 would still look okay as a tournament option. If Jones is in at 5,200 and starting, I would expect 28 to 30 minutes from him, which would look pretty decent. So that is a big piece of news that we're going to need.
Yeah, and this is a game that should be really high scoring. It is by far the highest total of the night. So a 241 total. You can't predict anything to do what last night's Kings-Clippers game did, but at least if you're looking at the totals in the game, if there was any one game that were expected to be the same kind of shootout, or at least, some sort of shootout, it would be this one with a 241 total. Anything else that really stand out to you from the Spurs?
Yeah, so the center position is going to look good. Zach Collins is up to 6,200, but that's still a reasonable price tag for him. If this game's competitive and he avoids foul trouble, you're likely getting around 30 minutes in a very appealing matchup. Like Kessler obviously is good defensively, but you're talking about a fast-paced game, plenty of rebound opportunities. Collins is a good point per minute guy. If Collins does get in foul trouble or the game blows out, you have a $3,500 Charles Bassey who has plenty of upside. Right now, he's projected for 17% ownership. That seems insane to me. He played 19 minutes last game, but that was a function of garbage time. He played 6 minutes of garbage time. Like he's just backing up Zach Collins, but does give you, a high ceiling if you get a blowout or foul trouble. So either of the centers look fine. I prefer getting the Collins. Keldon Johnson still gives you a high ceiling at 6,900 in a good matchup as well.
So let's talk about the final team of the slate. And it is the team with by far the highest points total the entire night, because the Utah Jazz are 9.5-point favorites in a game that is a 241 total. And that is more than 5 points higher than any other total on the slate. So Jazz expected to score a bunch of points, and we've got injuries here. Kelly Olynyk, questionable, rolled his ankle towards the tail end of the last game. Rudy Gay, also questionable. So if neither of them are able to play, we're looking at minutes to fill in the front court. Is there any one particular player you would be eyeing as a value option if Olynyk and Rudy Gay don't play?
Toscano Anderson?
My feeling is nobody.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my preferred answer. What I expect to happen is that you get like just minutes thrown around to Agbaji, Toscano Anderson, Fontecchio, and nobody ends up really mattering. Damian Jones, just plays the backup center minutes, which he did last game as well. But at times you've seen Kelly Olynyk play backup center minutes. I would expect that, if Olynyk's out, you're just getting the full, however many there are going to Damian Jones, which, at 3K flat, I guess could make him interesting in tournaments. But outside of, kind of trying to catch like lightning in a bottle like that, I don't think there's one guy that would look great. It would solidify also, though, probably solidify Walker Kessler's minutes. I guess that's actually where it would become most interesting to me if Olynyk is out, is you're probably getting 48 minutes at that point from Kessler plus Damian Jones. So either you're getting a very, very good play in Walker Kessler at 6,300, or if things go wrong for him, and it's not simply he just plays poorly, things go wrong in terms of playing time for one reason or another, that does become Damian Jones most likely playing a lot of minutes.
And then I think all of the Jazz guys that are not on the injury report look good in terms of the core starters, and they're all projected for ownership. Markkanen, Kessler, Clarkson, Taylor Norton Tucker, THT being the most popular by far. All these guys are projected for north of 20% ownership. Do you have issue with any of the ownership going to these popular Jazz guys?
Not at all. Fast-paced game. Spurs suck defensively. This team should be one of the most popular. And also, as we've talked through this slate, there haven't been a lot of teams that we've really loved a lot of guys from. It's kind of just been, picking a guy here or there. This is a game where I just expect to get tons of ownership. I expect the field will as well. But there's just nothing wrong with any of this. Walker Kessler, 6,300, another very good center option. Lauri Markkanen, 9,300. About a 1.2 fantasy point per minute guy in a great matchup. Jordan Clarkson at 7,300 looks fine. If Olynyk is in at 5,700, I don't have any issues with that. You got about 32 minutes in regulation from Taylor Horton Tucker last game. As long as he is starting, he should be one of the higher owned values at 5,500 with shooting guard, small forward eligibility. Just, again, make sure he's starting because Utah does sort of like to jerk his minutes around, but they don't have a lot of options at this point. So I love everybody starting for Utah, basically.
All right. That is going to do it for us today here, guys. If you haven't done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's still going to be some stuff that changed over the course of the day. We talked about some key injuries, and that's going to change later on today. So check out Live Before Lock. I'm pretty sure that is going to be Emac and Neil Orfield. So go check them out. Other than that, guys, that does it. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you guys back here on Monday.